podcast. We're recording something as a joint podcast, which is a bit funny actually. And also I'm doing this face to face with Dom, where we normally do it through Zoom only. So it's quite strange looking at the person I've been talking to the last few years and talking into the computer. But Dom's just sitting here, which is always interesting. So welcome to our podcast together.
Phil, it's great to be here. Welcome.
It's always fun. So we're going to talk today about the Growth Institute podcast. No, we're not. We're going to talk about the Growth Institute course that we're going to be running, which we're kicking off on September 6, 2023. And we thought it would be a good opportunity just to talk through a bit about what it is and why we're going to do it. So it's not the first time we've done this. It's not the first time we've worked with the Growth Institute. Why are we doing it this time?
I think we've had more than 150 individual people from multiple teams, multiple companies go through the course with us with the Growth Institute. And where people have found leadership teams are looking to do development, I think maybe they need to get clarity and alignment on a strategic direction. They're trying to nail down their culture. Maybe they've got a change program. Maybe they've got new people on the leadership team. These are all things I think are challenges that would make sense to do the scaling up master business program with the Growth Institute and us. Then, and there's an amount of 8 modules of video, then supported by a number of masterclasses, but also supported by weekly one-to-one coaching. And I think that weekly one-to-one coaching in small groups is really, really powerful. Certainly that's the feedback that we've had from teams that we've done it with so far, isn't it?
It is. And I think, you know, the companies we work with since 2022 running this on the specific to the Growth Institute have actually really benefited from that. And I know that the coaching I've done, they've said that the program's good, and we know it is, but actually the coaching helps really cement it together. So you get the teams working together, and whether you're an individual company coming together or working with multiple companies, you get real value from the lessons in the room as well. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen people get, that lessons in the room.
That 8 modules of scaling up coursework, what do you have a favorite module?
Good question, actually. So I have 2 favorite modules.
Okay.
And I think one of them sits in people and one of them sits in strategy.
Right.
Because I think we always talk about people, strategy, execution, and cash. And whether you're using a scaling up program or any other program, you've got to get those 2 right. And I think the bit around people, to cement that in the first place, is key. And the key bit is, Harry, how do we determine who should be in the team? Because we all know teams that have worked really well and they've got the mindset of driving themselves forwards. And there's other teams that don't work as well. So I think about how do you assess your talent in the first place is one of the bits that I really think is the underpinning foundation getting it going. So I would say the people piece around talent assessment is key.
And I mean, more broadly, I think certainly when I look at the data, new clients that we work with, they find that when they're looking at a player, the top 10% of available talent for a given job in a given location at a given salary, haven't thought about it quite like that in the past. And when they do the work, they find that maybe their A player percentage across their organization is somewhere between 10 and 35%. And so I find it, clients are then driven to say, okay, well, who've we got? Where are they? Where's some gaps? Maybe even the talented jerks, the toxic A's. Often people have a toxic A, and this gives them the impetus to do something about that. Typically, there aren't so many C players because whatever way you think about talent, they're often easy to move on. And then what's the strategy thing that you the module strategy? What's the bit in the strategy module you really like?
Well, interesting. I think it relates back to the cultural piece. You talked about, you know, people going through culture change. I think it's the culture piece about getting the right culture and values together, but then doing something about it. Because we talk about one-page strategic plan, and the left-hand page is very much the higher level piece, looking at purpose, big, hairy, audacious goal. But then how do you bring the values alive? Because actually that links into how do we build the right culture? And I come back to the same thing. If you've got the right team in place with the right culture, you can do anything, because you can actually make the commercial results different by doing that. And I think so many companies, you know, they come to us and want commercial return. That's revenues up, costs down. But the real benefit comes from getting the team right. If you get the culture right, you're going to build longer term sustainability. You know, Jim Collins talked about Good to Great all those years ago about getting that bit right. And how do you help your team understand how do we operate to deliver real value? So to me, it's the cultural piece of it, and then feeding that into some of the key priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. What do we need to do around team management? How do we build that team? So I think it's those bits. So strategy related to people and building that into the plan in the first place, I think is really key.
Okay, and I think you're right. Often people say, well, we've got a culture and it's great, but they haven't designed it deliberately to achieve their strategic objectives.
And I think it's that designing it deliberately. And I think it's making culture a strategic piece, because so many people just go at it from a commercial return, but actually we know they've got to get that underpinning in place. And I think if you want to grow the value of a business, we've worked on valuation models, and it's all underpinned around talent, capability, and culture. And that's the foundation. You can do anything, but if your foundation is weak, your business is going to crumble long term. So how do you build that? And how do you then build in, we talk about A play, how do we build in to coach people up from B plus or minus into the A? And you've got to put that on the plan. I think that's one of the key things. And making it a brick, effectively a rock in the glass. So that's the key bit, I would say. What about you? Where would you put your top module? There's 8 of them there. What's the key?
I think I reread from time to time that Jim Collins stuff.
Yeah.
And the last time I read, actually, no, it was reading BE 2.0, his latest book, where he sort of does beyond entrepreneurship, and he does a 20-year retrospective. And I was struck by how much he says one should obsess about the quality of the people and getting the right people on the bus. Yeah. And he goes back to the A player thing. And the one thing that falls out of that, I guess, is then you have to say, well, what could we do? Well, we're coaching, which is what you've talked about. Yeah. Often what happens is people say, let's review our recruitment process. Let's make sure that every single person we hire is an A player. Yeah. And then one of the things that flows from that is this sort of deliberate culture thing, which is, when we talk about scorecards, and we might say the company wants to invest in a particular role, it has a salary for a particular role. It needs a return on investment of that salary. And often, I think, as a rule of thumb, if I've got a salesperson, it's probably they're all up salary, and I want 3 to 5 times that in terms of gross profit. Yeah. I probably want the same for any one of if we're charging people out, if we've got engineers or consultants, I want something similar. Yeah. And so, in some of those roles, it's really easy to see what the return on investment is. And then saying, well, what are the KPIs? A year from now, what would an A player be delivering? What are the 3 to 5 things that they have to deliver, and at what level to be excellent? And making sure that that's what we go and hire for. And so we know we're hiring for A players for the next 12 months. Yeah. And that's really deliberate hiring policy, which again, most small businesses don't have that level of rigor around hiring to ensure that we have A players and scorecards. Yeah. And
actually, I think that scorecard fits in as well, because the thing is, strategically for a business, you've got to put your plans in place of where you want to be. And if we're setting our goal for 3 to 5 years, which is a point on the journey for our 10 to 20-year vision or wherever we're trying to go, which might be brought back closer for some businesses, it's being deliberate. I think that word deliberate is key. And linking people to some of the deliberate actions you want to take. What do we need to be great at? We talk about a lot of times about mapping out your target operating model and actually determining in that model, okay, red, amber, green, where are your bits you need to focus on? Because your green bits are good. What do we need to do to those other areas? And it might just not be people. It might be the processes that people follow. And I think that's a big bit as well around how do you get people to do the right thing? Because you and I know that we can get people on the bus, but unless they're doing the right things, the business is all going to fall over. Now, with an A player, you expect them to be doing that because they're doing themselves. But I do think you've got to look at how do we define the model with business runs on.
Yes, well, and I suppose picking up on that would be then just to reference another tool would be the functional accountability chart. Yeah. And that I was talking to a client this morning, and they hadn't had their best month ever.
Okay, shame.
And what had we not got to yet? Well, we hadn't yet got to functional accountability chart and leading versus lagging metrics. And so, they had a poor month, but they'd measured it. They're measuring really mainly lagging metrics, and so it had almost taken them by surprise. Whereas if we'd been looking at some leading metrics in those daily huddles, those weekly and monthly management meetings, they would have picked up that they were behind where they needed to be
before they got there. Interesting. I was talking to someone the other day, and he's not yet a client. I was talking to him about one of his salespeople, and I said, "What's the one thing you measure your salesperson on?" He said, "Budget." So what do you mean budget? He said, well, he's responsible for everything. He's got to hit the revenue, but he's also got to manage the numbers. He's also got product out the door. And I said, no, what's the one thing? And he said, it's not one thing. It's lots of things. What's your thoughts on that?
That's not a salesperson.
Oh, he's sales manager. He was managing the sale. Yes, sorry, sales.
I still think that's you've diluted that.
Yeah.
That specificity is one of those things that if you're trying to scale a business, specificity is really key. So, often clients will have this role selling to existing customers, and there'll be amount of selling, there'll be some account management, there'll be some sort of project management of the sale, there'll be generating the proposal, there'll be some tea and biscuits, there might be some customer success. There's loads of stuff.
Perfect timing.
I'll just ask.
Okay, back on. So we're talking about specificity was the key there, about how do you make sure you've got one thing to measure yourself against.
I mean, when people are doing scorecards, it's like, what is the one thing?
Yeah.
And so if you pick that sales manager, for example, then I think you'd say, well, the one thing is, it might be revenue, it might be gross margin, but there's an amount of sales that you're bringing in that is the key.
Yeah.
And all of those other things are actually probably somebody else's job. I think if your job is sales, then you should be spending 80% of your job doing it. Yeah. If your job is 10% sales and 10% this and 10% that and 10% the other, then you can't scale that organization, right? I can't measure you. Have I got the best salesperson that I could possibly have? Or have I got somebody who's does a bit of sales and does a bit of this and does a bit of that?
Yeah.
And as businesses, when you do a startup, you typically have first 6 people through the door, everyone's wearing multiple hats.
Everyone's doing it, yeah.
As you scale, you've got to be more specific. So selling to existing customers, different from selling to new business. Yeah. Selling, different from account management, different from customer success, different from project management. Often one of the things that we see scale in certainly in tech firms is pre-sales. At the beginning, pre-sales is probably done by somebody who's an engineer who's also responsible for delivery. Almost always, as those businesses scale, you see that pre-sales as the bottleneck in the business. And we're constantly looking for where is the constraint in the business. And often specialization is how you can identify that constraint and make sure that constraint is running 100% of the time to avoid it being the bottleneck.
Interestingly, this individual I'm talking about, which I think is really key, and I'd love to get them on the scaling up course because I think they'd learn so much from it around what's the one thing. They're actually a sales manager, so they've got people they're managing, they've got product to get out the door. And I think their boss, the guy above them, doesn't understand the fact that this guy should have one thing to be measured on. Because I think because they're scattergunning it, the boss is taking a very controlling aspect of it. And I think there's a lack of trust in the team.
Yes.
So one thing you asked me to say, what's the key area of me? And I said about people. I come back to Patrick Lencioni and we look at the 5 dysfunctions and say, what's the key thing that you build the 5 dysfunctions to turn into a functional team on? And it's trust. And I think about this individual, I think his boss does not trust him to do the job properly. He's trying to micromanage all the time. And I think that's a lack of respect for him, but I think it's him feeling like he's out of control.
Yes.
So I think there's something there about how do you build trust. If you've got good salespeople, you get them focused on one thing, but as the boss, I'm going to trust you to do the thing you're paid to do. And that's what I think this other person isn't doing at the moment.
Yeah, trust and verify, but that's where the scorecard comes in, because then we said in advance, what are we expecting leading and lagging indicators to be for the...
And we can mark you on effectively, have you done what you said you were going to do?
What's your say to do ratio?
Yeah, okay, good point. So talk about say to do ratio, that's the other thing. I come back to people and think about, one of the big things we work on scaling up is Rockefeller habit checklist.
Yeah.
10 questions with 4 questions done, so it's 40 questions in total. So we look back into people and execution. If you're looking at those, because obviously the execution model here is we can build the right people team, we can build the right strategy. Unless you go and do it, you're not going to deliver the cash at the end of the day. So thinking about execution, what's your biggest tip you're going to, if you were coaching a team now and you saw them come in the door as a tech firm or any other firm, and execution was an issue, where do you think, or where do you typically see execution falling down?
Oh God, it could be loads of different places. I think one of the, I've seen it, just recently seen it happen in a number of different places. Okay. So maybe talk about those two. So in one, the delivery team, both of these are tech firms. In one, the delivery team is saying, the support team is saying, we're supporting clients who seem to not have the wrong expectation. And they're looking at it from the support perspective, and they're very much in the support silo. And when we look at their business flow, sales are short of marketing leads, so are selling anything that they can.
Yeah.
And therefore the customer isn't the right customer and does have the wrong expectations, and then support are finding it difficult to deliver at the level that the customer has an expectation.
Yeah.
And until we get the team in a room and we sit down and we map that process back, the head of support had never thought that the only way to solve their problem was to help fix marketing. They saw themselves in their own swim lanes, in their own silos, and that really they didn't see the connection across the business process.
Yeah.
And so that's one that we've seen a number of times where if we approach this as a team, we can fix it. Whereas if we approach it on our own, maybe we're digging, we're just in the dark digging every day, feeling no sense of forward momentum because shit's just sort of pilot continuing to pile down in front. And in other organizations, you've got that sales have been successful, and now there is a backlog or a waterfall or a high level of work in progress in the operations team, and that is a lack of management around efficient use of resources. And so there's a process there that says, how are we billing our clients? How are we turning up? How are we measuring success? And even sometimes just reporting. The operations team, I've seen this in a number of clients where the operations team ring a client and say, we need to book somebody in to come and do some work for you. And the client goes, oh, I'm not free until 3 weeks on Tuesday. And the client is always driving this. And so they just never seem to get on top of their utilization. Whereas other clients would just go, this is your slot.
Yeah, book it in.
The engineer's in your area on Tuesday. And often it's the evolution of a firm over time versus somebody with another business model or another way of doing things. And quite often that's what we get to do as coaches. We go, have you thought about doing it like this? Or what would happen if you did it like this? Or here's an example of a client that we've worked with who's done it, same thing, but differently and had a different result.
Yeah. I like that. And interesting, actually, because I think that's where the target operating model comes in. And we use that language, between you and I, but actually it's about understanding how do we help the business run so everything runs smoothly. And getting the teams that are in. We've had people in this room where we've talked to them about how did your business run today? What's the current and how do you need to be? And when they start working as a team, they don't just blame sales. They can say, hey, this is where the issue is. But they can critically evaluate each section of their business, each function, and understand how does the business flow. And I think that's that same thing coming alive, where we don't just blame someone else for it. We're actually saying, okay, what do we can do? If sales need more marketing needs, how can we help the team unblock the pipe?
I often think about this as watching 7-year-olds play football. And Johnny comes up and he says to his mum, I scored 2 goals. Look at me. Aren't I amazing? And the team lost 5-2. But Johnny doesn't care that the team lost 5-2 because that's not his job. His job is to score goals. And at 7, that's entirely reasonable. But I think if sales can win but operations are losing, then the management team, the leadership team in this organization is not winning. And so that target operating model you refer to really is to say, what game are we playing? What's the score? What are the white lines? What are the rules? How are we turning up? I've played sport most of my, team sport most of my life. And, you'd go and train on a Tuesday and a Thursday in the rain. Why do you go? Because you said you were going to go.
Yeah, you turn up.
And you turn up. And then you play on a Saturday. And most of the time you're playing a game that nobody cares about the result except you. But, you're playing in a position and the team are counting on you to, I don't know, do whatever it is, scrummage or catch in the line out or kick a ball or run, score a try. And everybody, without the team playing together as a team, we'll get beaten by the opposition. And so I think so often individuals are in a silo and we're not working as a team, and the KPIs and the metrics aren't joined up and they're not looked at in a real-time way. So it gets to the end of the month and people go, how did we do?
Yeah.
What game were we playing? What was the score? What position did we say we were going to be in? Are we practicing? Right. And so, I know Malcolm Gladwell has had a bit of stick about his 10,000 hours rule, and he might have misrepresented it slightly. But what is absolutely undeniable is that nobody takes on a skill without deliberate practice.
Yeah.
And I think business is a full contact sport. And I think you have to practice. And I think there's no point in practice. I don't know about you, Phil, but I meet a lot of people who play golf. And I say to them, are you any better now than you were 20 years ago? And most of the time they say, no, I'm worse.
Yeah.
And that's because they're actually playing golf because they enjoy playing golf. And they're not actually spending any time to be deliberately practicing golf to be better at golf. And so this is like, are you in business and are you happy with your results? And if you are, just being in business might be enough joy for you.
Yeah.
But if you want to be better, if you're the owner operator of a business and you want this business you want to maximize the value of your life's work, then building a team takes deliberate practice, and you've got to have some playbooks. So you've got to run the playbooks, practice the playbooks, because as we know, when you're playing and you're under pressure, you have to respond instinctively. And so the playbooks and practice are about thinking about what we should be doing when we're under pressure and building the muscle memory around that.
Yeah.
And whether that's having difficult conversations or whether that's hiring right or building the right culture, this is all deliberate practice for the game of playing business and winning.
I love that actually. I've just been listening again to Carol Dweck's book about growth mindset. And it really fascinates me when you talk about that, because a lot of the people we see in the world as being top of their game aren't necessarily the most gifted, but they're the most dedicated. So she talks about Michael Jordan, she talks about Muhammad Ali, she talks about Tiger Woods from a sporting angle. She then talks about Jack Welch from a GE perspective. Now, people have different views about GE maybe over the last few years, but what they did is they had that growth mindset, comparing with some of the fixed mindset people who said, I've got it already. And what she said is, if you look at good to great, and what Jim Collins did when he looked through at the companies he was following, when he did the comparative study about those who weren't achieving the results, the one thing he found was there was a leader in those businesses in the fixed mindset sense who actually said, it's all about me. It was the hero surrounded by a team to go and do their work. Whereas what she found when she talked to Jim Collins about the businesses that did really well, they had a hero in the center, but actually they pulled the team together. It wasn't about it was about we. And I think that's that mindset piece around, actually, if you put out there to play golf and you just want to have a social walk around the park and enjoy it with your friends, be happy with that. If you want to learn, you need to put in the hours to do it and challenge yourself. So when it goes wrong, you can still get yourself out of the rough because you've done it time and time again.
And I think even having a mental model about what we're trying to do and why, the US, any army would say no plan survives first contact. And, the value's in the planning, not in the plan. And so if you've thought about what you're trying to achieve and you've got a plan to achieve it, even if the plan goes wrong, you still understand all the stuff that got you to the point where the plan is, and you can then much more quickly pivot. Yeah. But I was also thinking, as you were talking, that research that Gladwell quotes about I think it's the viola thing in Vienna. One of the things is that it didn't matter whether you practiced 2,000 hours or 10,000 hours. Nobody liked practice. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Even the people that went on to be soloists didn't enjoy practice. And so I take heart in that. Right. So that's why I think purpose is important.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Why are you doing it?
So you have to have a why, because there's going to be times when this isn't like fun. Yeah. Right. You're going to have to dig deep.
It's about better than
which is a mindset thing. But turning up and training on a Tuesday in the middle of the season. It's like, we're going to be playing in the cold, and it's getting colder and muddier, and we're still turning up. And that you've got to have a reason to do that, otherwise you'll stop. And I just think it's fascinating. But also what was also true is that the soloists did practice more than the people who went on to be playing an orchestra, and they practiced more than the people who went to go on to be music teachers. And so this, they might have all had the same level of innate talent on the way into the school, but the ones that had the right mindset, had purpose, drove themselves to do more deliberate practice, ended up with a better outcome. And so
I think
it's in your control. This is, as a team, you can pull a team together and outperform. There's so many examples of the team outperforming a group of individuals.
And I think it's interesting because you've worked at companies where you've had the leader has moved on to other businesses. They've done well in their own business, and then they've moved on to another business, and then they've made that work as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's that
lucky.
mentality.
They're lucky.
Lucky, just lucky. Yeah. They woke up with the lucky gene. They've worn the silver spoon in their mouth.
Yeah.
But it's something else as well as luck.
I think the CEO's got two jobs. If the CEO if CEO's got skills to do with that's great. But two jobs is really they've got to come up with a vision.
Yeah.
And they've got to sell the vision.
Yeah.
Right. And if the CEO's doing that, and I mean part of the program that we work on is that, how do you create purpose, BHAG, core values, which Jim Collins describes that whole thing as the vision.
Yeah.
And I think coming up with that process that says, well, okay, how do I do that? I was with some clients the other week, and they're like, we don't really like our purpose. Works for some people, but not for everybody. So we don't tend to talk about it very much.
Brush another carpet.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, let's do a bit of work around working out what it actually is in your business, what it could be that everybody could get behind.
Yeah.
Because when I see that work really well, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you use that word purpose just now. It's getting yourself out in the morning when it's wet and cold, if you're out training something, or if it's running your business, or if you're playing the viola, it's about having a purpose. You've seen people who struggle with this, and I think Jim Collins talks about this, about having a purpose. I always say a purpose above and beyond making money.
Yeah,
that's just my view on it, because that builds the team together and actually gives you another view on it. And I think if you look at those businesses that do really, really well, they have got that purpose that bonds you together. What have you seen where businesses have, you talked about not having a purpose and failing on it. What have you seen that's glued people together? What's the bits that's created a real why?
I mean, one of the clients that we work with is a company called OnTruck in Spain, whose purpose was a world without waste. And so they were building a delivery algorithm for trucks. And their long-term goal was that these trucks would ultimately be EV, but today they're not. Okay. But they built a delivery algorithm, and they were selling that on their own. Now they're licensing that to larger manufacturers because they pivoted the product, if you like, or they pivoted the solution. And so where it really works is where I think you're not in love with your solution, but you're in love with the purpose and you're in love with the problem you solve for the group of customers that you solve it for. So I love this space, and my solution, I bring it to market and it may or may not work, but it means it's clear what else I could add to my solution.
Yeah.
When, I can use it to make strategic decisions. Or at Rackspace, we had fanatical support with really our purpose statement. And so that drove us to deliver a customer service level. And in our BHAG, we said we were going to be the Ritz-Carlton of IT service. And at Pier 1, we ended up with a value that became our marketing slogan, which was every interaction matters, which again was around the service quality of our business and what was important to us. And then they have impacts, not just with the customer, but with employees. At Rackspace, we changed the maternity policy or paternity policy in the UK because we got some feedback from the team that it wasn't very fanatical. It was just a bit ordinary, a bit shit. And so that's where I think if you've got a purpose that people are in tune with, then people are always saying, should we go left or right? Should we zig or zag? Which one takes us? Which one's in keeping or more in keeping with our purpose?
Yeah. It's interesting. You've told me this a few times. We've talked to clients about this. The story about Ritz-Carlton, you saying you want to be the Ritz-Carlton in your space. That did more for you than just purpose. And you've always told the story about what that did for you in terms of the media.
Oh, I mean, that's sort of our BHAG statement, that where will we be in 10 to 25 years? And I mean, we used to have something terribly dull, like we want to be the number one, or we want to be the leading managed service provider for customers who care about something, blah, blah, blah. And then just to change it to be what we want. And what happened was, I think the fact that journalists would write about us around Rackspace, and they would say, Rackspace, the Ritz-Carlton of IT services. And so just the fact that we'd written it in that way meant it became self-fulfilling, because people would speak about it as if it was already true rather than it was a 10-year goal.
Actually, that's true. They speak about it as if it was already true. So it gave you something to aim for as well.
Yeah, well, and I think what's interesting is I suppose if I was to formalize that now, what would I do? Well, one of the tools I might use might be a tool we've nicked from Amazon, which would be PR FAQ. Okay. So what you do is you say, at some future state, we're going to have launched a product for a group of customers and it will solve a particular problem. And so you write the press release, which puts you in that future state. Yeah. And then you write the FAQ document, which is an internal document, which you then say, what has to be true for that to happen. And so I like that as an exercise in sort of future casting, or almost sort of doing a pre-mortem on our strategic intent. Yeah, I love that. It's interesting, isn't it? That future casting thing is the key. We always, when you talk about Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind, and that's what that PR FAQ is doing. Yeah. Start, where do we want to be? What do we want people to be saying about us? And go out and know your way of creating it. And in some ways, that's what the conversation full circle, because we talked about, building a plan out for the future and creating your actions to live by, and then looking at what you can feed into a strategic plan. So where do you want to be? And I think this is one of the key things. It's about having that foresight of what you want. And then with that growth mindset saying, what do we need to learn? What do we need to do? What do we need to deliver to get us into that state in the future? And I think that's a really interesting part for a lot of people. They don't think like that straight off the bat. No, I think they're often thinking, last year we did 10% and we're going to do 10% more, and then we're going to do 10% more, rather than if we wanted to be 60 million, 100 million, 250 million, what would need to be true? Yeah, and it's interesting. You and I have talked about Dan Sullivan's book, 10x is easier than 2x. Yes, and I think that's the key thinking difference, isn't it? Yes. What do you need to do differently to 10x your business just to double it next year, or 10% as most people be thinking of? Yes. So let's just come back. The point of this is, growth mindset comes into growth institute. Growth mindset to me is about the leaders learning. Rockefeller habit number one is about the executive team is healthy and aligned, but under there is the executive team engages in executive education. This is where this growth institute program, I think, comes to mind for me. It's about doing something and investing in yourselves, which you might or might not have done before. So what have you seen that's enabled people to make the time to do this and then make a success of it? I don't think you need to make any time. I mean, it's not, it doesn't take very long. There's sort of 8 hours of video content, right? So don't watch Netflix that week. That'll save you 4 hours. I don't know what you're going to do with the other 3. One of the things that I've done is certainly when I've done courses with Growth Institute myself, is, on the treadmill, on the bike. I've actually watched the videos whilst doing some exercise. Now, you can't do it whilst you're out running. You can listen to the audio, but you don't see any of the diagrams or what have you. But certainly I've done that. That's helpful. Yeah. And then I think this isn't instead of work, this is what work is. So, in terms of the coaching, that's as well as maybe you schedule it ahead of the weekly meeting, or if you're keen, you do it 8 till 9 or 5 till 6. But honestly, if you can't find an hour a week to focus on this, then you're too busy, and the quality of your team is not good enough. Good point. And really you're never going to get out of this hole. So this is an 8-week investment to help you think differently about your business. Yeah. And if you have to put in a few extra hours in this 8 weeks, then I think you get a really clear outcome at the end, which is, what do we need to fix so that we've freed ourselves up to spend more time on running the business. I think that's the key. And actually, that's, I think, one of the key things, isn't it? I believe by doing this program, you'll get time back. It will increase your ability to think about the future in terms of 10x is bigger than 2x, or easier than 2x, but actually it will give you the time to go and make it happen as well. So if you can't find the time now by doing this program, I know you'll find the time, because it will make it available. And whether you do 8 till 9 or 5 to 6 or 1 till 2, you'll fit it in. Look, we have a conversation regularly about daily huddles. Yeah. Right. And so people go, I don't know how I can fit in another daily huddle. Why do I need another meeting in my life? And it's like 15 minutes once a day. Honestly, if that doesn't save you an hour, then don't do it. But if you do it right, every single time we put the strong arm on people and go, just do it for a month and see what happens. they come back and they go, right, that was brilliant. I'm glad you forced us to do that, because actually we're seeing a much better saving than an hour. We're seeing maybe 2 or 3 hours of saving, and there's just the momentum and a lack of reduction in rework that just means we're running the business so much more efficiently. That's what we're doing. We're trying to provide some tools for people to help them run their businesses more efficiently.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is about more efficiency of productivity. It will produce results at the end of the day. And we can sit here and say this because we've been doing this for a long time, running these programs in this very building, helping people actually do things differently. But actually, we know the result is more time, less stress, more money, more fun to go for other people. And I think that's what it does for people, because it educates you on how you can get out there and make your business a better place to be. Yeah, sounds good. So, what are the things we need to talk about? Anything else? That it? Job done. Yeah. Right. Enjoy the podcast. Hope that works well. And Don Monkhouse, Phil Rose, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Nice.